Hi, I'm Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report. You know, we take on the big banks on this show, and we have, in effect, I want to draw your attention to this Financial Times story this morning. Goldman Sachs' largest investor has slashed its stake by more than half in the last quarter as the bank contended with civil fraud charges by U.S. securities regulators, brought to those regulators' attention by us. That's right. AXA, the French insurance company, dumped Goldman Sachs stock. The stock's under severe pressure. Why? Because we're telling it like it is. Let's get into the details of other major scandals in the world of finance, markets, and, hey, Stacy Herbert, what's happening?
Foot massages and central bankers are in my headlines. First, there was a Jackson Hole meeting with all these central bankers, and they're now all promising all sorts of stuff. From the U.S. Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, and the Bank of Japan are all promising new money, quantitative easing, buying government bonds in order to keep rates down. And in Switzerland and Norway, their central banks are, almost as a result, actually having to intervene in the currency markets because their currencies are escalating.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially in the East, in the Japan, of course, as you have the unwinding of the global derivatives bubble that is now crashing. A lot of that means that people have to buy back their yen in order to unwind the derivatives contracts that are based in yen and Swiss francs and U.S. dollars.
It bodes ill for the friendship between all of these governments and central banks because they're all trying to coordinate together. But once it starts going wild and all of these currencies are having very sharp moves up and down each day, it causes unrest in their own countries. So let's look at my first headline here. Foot massage doubles and Chinese doubt official price data. Yes, apparently inflation amongst the people, what they're feeling is skyrocketing. And foot massages have doubled in price in the last year, apparently, and this is an important one because it used to cost $10 in Beijing, and many, apparently, Beijing residents like to have their foot massaged.
$10 for a foot massage?
Now it's $20.
Now what, $20?
And as Zoe Wang, a 29-year-old strategy consultant, says, unfortunately, my salary didn't double. Well,
you see, the thing that we have here is, of course, there's a peg between the Chinese currency and the U.S. dollar. Bernanke, Geithner, Summers, Obama put $800 billion or so into fiscal stimulation. He put another $800 billion, which became $5 trillion in monetary stimulus. And, of course, that didn't happen, the effect of causing any inflation in the U.S., but it simply went zzz, over to China. So actually China's inherited America's inflation. So Bernanke would love to see some inflation in the U.S. because that economy is sinking like a stone, but because all the jobs and all the manufacturing and essentially all the capacity of the economy is in China, all that money that Obama released into the economy has now found its way in China.
And, of course, it gives more incentive to them to actually unpeg from the dollar. If they could have the yuan rise significantly, all those prices of goods and, food and oil that the consumers in China are complaining about, those would just collapse if they could rejig their currency.
Yeah, they have that as a possibility, and this is the so-called decoupling. That China would allow its currency to appreciate, which would give everybody in China increased purchasing power of the yuan. And then you'd have the slack picked up from any loss of exports to the U.S. You'd create a domestic consumer culture, and they have that option. And I believe that they're just waiting for the right moment to do so. As soon as they get that last American to buy that last Chinese-made good at Walmart, that they can't borrow any more money to buy it, they're going to hit the ripcord and let that yuan appreciate and sayonara America as first world country.
Well, just across the sea, you have Japan's struggle with deflation worsens as prices fall. Japan's core consumer prices index fell for the 17th month in a row in July, underlining the country's entrenched problems with deflation.
More of the same. I mean, you've got, the key point I think that you have made that I want to reiterate here is that this is leading toward global conflict. The ability to create a global monetary cohesion that ended along with peak credit. We had peak globalization and peak post-World War II complicity in creating a Bretton Woods-style global U.S. dollar-backed reserve currency model. It's breaking apart, which is leading to conflicts. And so China is becoming much more militaristic. They're actually beefing up their military presence. They're competing with the world in places like Africa for resources. So it's becoming much more of a conflict-based scenario now going forward.
Well, I have to say, Japan looks like it's becoming militaristic if you check out the next headline. Japan makes fresh attempt to kill the yen. The Japanese often act, apparently, as a kamikaze sort of way, hara-kiri. They kill their own currency in order to they're trying to boost exports.
The currency movements are in the hands of the hedge funds, the global hedge funds, who are in the U.S. active in actually being the buyer of U.S. Treasury markets through the shadow banking system, as Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of UK, used to call it the shadow banking system. So the hedge funds are determining the direction of currencies, which determines prices of stuff that people actually use. So until there's an effort to decapitalize these pernicious hedge funds whose interests are not aligned with any country at all, they're just purely self-interested parasites. Until there's a move to decapitalize them, then this volatility will not cease.
But there's also another thing here happening in Japan. So for 20 years, they've been fighting deflation. And for 20 years, they've been following the same exact policies, just lowering interest rates and buying more of their own government debt. But it won't work because the consumers won't spend. So maybe after 20 years of doing the same thing, maybe you think there's a different sort of way to run the economy.
I hear what you're saying, and all I can think about are foot massages. I don't know. You put that thought in my head. And
well, there's opportunity there for them to...
What's the price of a foot massage in Tokyo these days?
So, well, let's move over to the U.S. Bernanke tries to manage expectations. Mm-hmm. Not on foot massages, I don't think. I'm not sure what the price of a foot massage is going for.
For Bernanke, it'd be very, very high because he has very big feet. He constantly puts his foot in his mouth as well, so he needs a massage quite often. But you have to get the saliva off, so they have to charge extra.
Well, he's vowed to do whatever it takes to fight deflation happening in the U.S. Famous last words. I believe the Japanese central bankers also said the same thing 20 years ago.
I have to interrupt you for a second because he said something at the Jackson Hole meeting of central bankers where he said to the effect that he may have to raise the inflation target. Now, this is like having a full-scale stand-up economic comedian routine, because he would love to have some inflation. There's no inflation at all. The problem is deflation. So to say he may have to raise the inflation target is really hysterically funny because there is no evidence of any inflation.
Well, they're also trying to ward off the alleged, bond vigilantes who I think were shot down, gunned down at least a decade ago, because they don't exist anymore. But he's trying to suggest, signal to the market that we're going to let inflation go up higher to 4 or 5%. We're not going to target it at 2%. We want it to be 5% or 4%.
Yeah, the system is utterly broken. The price discovery mechanism, the prices we see are set by computer, as we've talked about on this show before. It's not the result of supply and demand of any underlying normal economic activity. It's a command and control economy by hedge funds who are just stealing billions every day out of the system for themselves. And the result is you see it in loss of wages, loss of jobs, and the widening wealth and income gap, especially in the U.S., that's just skyrocketing to new all-time highs because the economy broke. And all you have now are vultures stealing what's left.
Well, it's also, going back to China, I mean, it's not really up to Ben Bernanke. It's up to China. Whether, first of all, there's inflation in the price of goods, because everything sold in America is made in China. So if these workers in China are going to be getting increases of double their salaries, because they have to pay for their expensive foot massages, well, that's a bad sign for the U.S.
Yeah, I read something fascinating. You know, Rick Ackerman over there at Rick's Picks, he was writing about how in the U.S. there's $15 trillion in mortgage debt still. And in China, there's $15 trillion in mortgage equity. And in China, really, they don't have credit card debt. They don't have mortgage debt. So now if you want to take that $15 trillion in equity that they actually have in China, and then you start to borrow against it, the purchasing power potential is enormous. And it's just a matter of them, I think, picking the time in the day to cut the caboose of the American economy free, as Peter Schiff calls America the caboose on the global economic train. And China's just waiting for the right time to cut free of this caboose and to fly solo, as the world's superpower, the only world superpower.
Well, that brings me to the last headline, because as I said, it's up to China whether they continue buying this bogus paper that Ben Bernanke, with his big feet, keeps putting out. Mullen, national debt is a security threat. So this is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, and he was speaking to some students in Detroit, and he said taxpayers will be paying around $600 billion in interest on the national debt in 2012. That's 1 year's worth of defense budget.
This is the remarkable thing about the rally this past weekend with Glenn Beck and Sarah Palin. No mention at all of the defense budget, the single greatest contributing factor to America's quote-unquote loss of honor.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember back in the 60s, we had a talk show host named Soupy Sales. And, Glenn Beck is the Soupy Sales of our era. Imagine Soupy Sales having a rally in Washington and tens of thousands of people coming. Put some images of Soupy Sales up there. You can see Soupy Sales right now. A clown, TV clown. And Glenn Beck is a TV clown. And imagine him, actually people taking Soupy Sales seriously and going to a rally sponsored by this TV clown. People think that Glenn Beck is something other than a TV rodeo clown. And Sarah Palin was a politician. Now she's a stand-up comedian. Okay?
I seem to recall that Soupy Sales was actually fired for encouraging children around America to send him some greenbacks from their parents' wallets.
That's exactly right.
He was sent many dollars.
There was the FCC, a regulatory agency, said you can't do that, and they shut him down. Somebody should shut this clown down. People are taking him seriously.
And while they're at it, shut down all these other central banks who are also clowning everybody with their big feet. You talk about Ben Bernanke's big clown feet.
With a big red nose. He should just dress up like a clown and get paid as a clown. He'd do better, I think. It's more honest representation. Well, we'll keep track of this very closely in the months ahead. Stacy Herbert, thanks again for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay there. Don't go away. Much more after the break. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to speak with Micha Kat. He's a Dutch journalist and author of Accounting Fraud. He's also being sued as we speak by the Bilderberg Group. Micha, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Hi, Max. Great that you will have me.
All right. Micha, first, for those who don't know, tell us who or what is the Bilderberg Group and why are they suing you?
To put it simply, it's a secret, or as we speak, a half-secret congregation of around 100 to 150 world leaders from political field, monarchy and business, corporate fields who come together every year to decide what the world is heading for.
Right. So as more and more people are aware that all the nations in the world, including the United States, are now deferring to these global organizations, whether it's the IMF or the World Bank or some other global organizations, what they're becoming aware of are the people behind these global organizations, and the Bilderberg Group is mentioned often. Now, they are suing you, so what are they suing you for?
Yeah, exactly, Max. I'm very glad to tell this because it's the first time ever in world history that the Bilderberg acts as a party who is going to prosecute individual person, in this case a journalist. This never happened before, and it's a story which starts in the Netherlands in a city called Leiden, and it was revealed, I think now 2 years ago, by a very small local newspaper of this city, that the Bilderberg, the famous global powerhouse of Bilderberg, had its headquarters in this city. Its global headquarters. And it was a totally hidden place, just like a normal, very small house. Low profile, no signs, nothing. It was completely hidden. Some old couple living there. The newspaper said a very nice looking senior opens the door. But the address was mentioned. And it was definitely said, this is the headquarters of Bilderberg worldwide. But then, of course, typical mainstream media, there was no follow-up. Nothing happened. So then I decided to have a look at this place. And I went there and, nobody was home. So I was joking, maybe we find our queen, the Queen Beatrix, who's a very prominent Bilderberger there. Maybe Tony Blair will be working in the garden. You never know who you will meet when you're doing this kind of research. But the place turned out to be totally empty. And then I painted some verbs on the Bilderberg headquarters, like the Bilderbergers in red, big red letters, and also no NWO, meaning NWO stands for New World Order.
So, Mika, you were splashing some graffiti on the home of some old couple in the Netherlands.
Absolutely true.
But now, you're being sued. Are you being sued by the Bilderberg Group? So they're suing you for what?
For damaging their property, because that's what's in the statements of the court, that I damaged the property of the Bilderbergers.
Where is the lawsuit being filed?
It's in the court of The Hague, which is the capital of the Netherlands, and it will be enacted, the whole show, on the 1st of September. I will not be there because I'm in Bangkok right now, and I don't come over for this New World Order show. Above all, I don't trust the judge at all, because the judge is totally corrupted, because who can ever do a case against the Bilderbergers, of which our queen is a prominent member, and the portrait of the queen is hanging above the judge to look if the judge is doing things all right. So you can never be an independent judge in these circumstances.
Okay, make a question. If you have this lawsuit, the lawsuit is proceeding, this would give you, the defendant in this case, I guess through the legal processes, you would have the ability to pry open under the discovery process. Isn't this giving you a unique opportunity to get under the hood a little bit of the Bilderberg and actually find out information that we haven't really seen in the public domain yet? Is that accurate?
That's very accurate, because there's one very interesting aspect in the lawsuit which will be directly in the field of your program about banking, or about suicide bankers. Because what happens? You know that maybe a very related organization to the Bilderbergers is the Trilateral Commission. You know what it is? It's a banking-dominated satellite of the Bilderbergers. And the president of our national bank is Mr. Nout Welling. He's one of the most powerful bankers in the world, also very prominent in Basel, in Bank of International Settlements. This guy was interrogated by a commission doing research in the credit crisis in the Netherlands. A very high-profile commission with all kind of important parliamentarians. And of course, they also had this Mr. Welling before them to ask questions. And this Welling is a prominent member of Bilderberg, Trilateral Commission. And then they only ask very stupid questions like, have you ever discussed about ING Bank with this and this person? Totally irrelevant bullshit. And then I screamed from the public area like that they should ask questions about the Trilateral Commission. because that's the real important thing what was decided there. Well, and then I was just arrested by the police when I was just put in a police van, and I have been in jail for like 5 or 6 hours. And this is also part of this process. So it's not only about this having painted graffiti on the Bilderberg headquarters, but also about what they call disturbing this very important public credit crunch meeting in the Netherlands.
So let's put this into perspective for a second. The New World Order, as that term is used, it includes groups like the Bilderberg Group. It includes the Trilateral Commission, or the Council on Foreign Affairs, of course, is a huge part. The roundtable, the business roundtable in the U.S. Now included on those in those groups, and these are global groups. And what we're seeing, and what people don't understand maybe in the U.S., is that the U.S. is ceding power to these global groups. Obama recently mentioned, I believe, that there's a lawsuit now against Arizona that he's taking through the United Nations. So he's actually deferring now to a global institution to deal with a national problem. And this is really a huge step forward in the loss of the U.S. as being a sovereign state in terms of its place in this new global world order, or New World Order as it's called. Now, the problem, Mika, is that you're an independent journalist, and you're going up against other journalists who happen to also be in the pocket of these same guys. Now, for example, in the past week, Frank Rich at the New York Times blew the whistle on the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers started off as an oil-rich company, a conglomerate. They're the couple of the richest guys in America. They spend millions and millions feeding climate change denier groups and sponsoring things like the Glenn Beck, Sarah Palin rally of clowns in Washington recently. So as an independent journalist, Mika, it's tough to fight the perception that you're on the fringe, because by virtue of the fact that the entire media conglomerate's owned by the same New World Order groups, you are, by definition, on the fringe. So how can you, I'm asking you this as a journalist, how can you maintain your journalistic integrity and credibility when the entire journalistic landscape is completely corrupted, as is the banking system?
Yeah, it's a very good point. But of course, Max, when you're talking about the total corruption of the media, that also gives more chance to independent journalism, because a very interesting niche is created for people who are looking to the real facts. So this is a war we are winning. It's going very slowly, but we are winning. And a proof for this statement is also, I mentioned it at the beginning of this program, that more and more people are also, thanks to you and your program, of course, Max, are becoming aware of suicide bankers, of Bilderberg conspiracies, of Trilateral Commission, which was founded by David Rockefeller, a founder also of the family of Chase Manhattan Bank. You know, all these organizations which have been able to move into secrecy for decades is now coming into the open.
You talked about the suicide bankers. What about the Dutch suicide bankers? How are they, right there in your own backyard, how are they contributing to the global financial crisis?
This is, of course, also a very eminent point, because you know that the Netherlands is famous for its banks, for its very big banks. I think in the top 20 are 5 or 6 Dutch banks, like ING, ABN AMRO, Rabo. I think bank-wise, the situation in the Netherlands is one of the worst in Europe, because our biggest 2 banks have tried to merge, which became a complete failure and now is nationalized. ABN AMRO, ING, which is one of the biggest banks of the world also, is semi-nationalized. The total chaos. Nobody knows what's on their balance. Nobody knows what's going on in this bank. We have so many scandals. You know, the iSafe scandal, you've reported on this a lot. The Iceland situation, the Netherlands, of course, next to England, very much involved, disastrously involved. We still get, I think, 3 or 5 billion from the Icelanders. There's no way, nobody knows who's going to pay this back. And what's more, and this is very alarming, Max, you should know that iSafe was a criminal bank. It was run, the CEO of Landsbanki was a known criminal. Now, normally spoken, you know, Max, national banks have the obligation to do research to the complete management and board of the banks who want to operate in the country. So when there's a criminal, a known criminal, of course, the National Bank should prohibit this bank from becoming involved in the country it supervises, like what happened in France. In France, Landsbanki was prohibited because they said, no, we don't want criminal bankers. But in the Netherlands, it was okay, no problem at all, you can go here. And my explanation for this is that this Mr. Welling I talked about, this president of the Dutch National Bank, he is deeply involved in this Bilderberg business, and that means there's one word which is very common to organizations, and that is globalization. I mean, this is really what you see happening in this Bilderberg terrestrial environment, where, red carpets are just rolled out for everybody to plunder the population.
Going forward, how do you feel your chances against the Bilderberg Group in this lawsuit? Do you like your chances, or will you be squashed like a bug?
I will be squashed like a bug, but my upside is, Max, of course, and that's the only reason why I do this kind of things, is to reap some publicity as a result of this lawsuit. So I can tell about this now on your show. There's been a big piece on Alex Jones about this process on his website. So through that, I can, contribute to the awareness, awakening of the people, of the masses against this criminal, conspirational societies, and do my thing.
All right. Mika Kat, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report. We'll keep up on this in the coming months.
Okay, Max. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with Max Keiser and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Mika Kat. And if you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.